Hi, welcome to Conflict Story, where we bring you the best and most fascinating stories just for you. Let's dive right into one of those stories. It begins like this.
My name's Sam, and I never thought I'd find myself locked in a battle with a homeowners association, especially one I wasn't even a part of. Life has a way of throwing curveballs, and this one came in the form of an overbearing homeowner association trying to control land they had no jurisdiction over. I grew up in Pinewood Valley, a quiet, close-knit town nestled in the foothills of Colorado. After years of working in Denver as a software developer, I decided it was time to return to my roots. My grandfather had left me a sprawling 6-acre property just outside town, surrounded by towering pines and bordered by a crystal-clear mountain stream. For as long as I could remember, I had dreamed of building a cabin there, a modern, sustainable retreat where I could balance work and reconnect with nature. At 38, I finally had the savings to make that dream a reality. With the help of an architect, I designed a minimalist, eco-friendly home that would blend seamlessly with the natural surroundings. The plan included solar panels, a rainwater harvesting system, and reclaimed wood from a nearby lumberyard. The day I submitted my building permits at Town Hall felt like the culmination of years of hard work and planning. As I stepped out of the building, I was approached by a woman who introduced herself as Susan Blake, president of the Whispering Pines Estates Homeowner Association. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, she exuded an air of authority. "I couldn't help but notice your building plans," she said, her tone cordial but with an edge. "Are you planning construction within Whispering Pines Estates?" I shook my head. "No, my property's off Timberline Road, outside the subdivision." Her expression tightened, though her smile remained. "Actually, Timberline Road falls within our expanded jurisdiction. All new construction must adhere to our architectural guidelines and receive approval from our review board." I frowned. "I'm pretty sure my land isn't part of any homeowner association. It's been in my family for generations." Susan handed me a business card. "Why don't you attend our next board meeting? We can clarify any misunderstandings and ensure your plans align with community standards." Confused and slightly annoyed, I took the card. Back at home, I dug through property records and confirmed what I already knew. My land was privately owned and not subject to any homeowner association rules. Even so, I decided to attend the meeting to set the record straight. The meeting was held in the Whispering Pines Clubhouse, a pristine building surrounded by manicured lawns and identical houses. As I walked in, I felt like a fish out of water among the neatly dressed residents, sipping lattes and exchanging pleasantries. Susan greeted me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Everyone, this is Sam. He's planning construction near our community," she announced. Clearing my throat, I said, "Actually, I'm here to clarify that my property is not part of Whispering Pines Estates and isn't subject to homeowner association oversight." Susan's smile faltered. "Sam, we're all part of a larger community. It's important to maintain aesthetic harmony. Your plans need our review to ensure they meet our standards." I held up a folder. "I've brought my property deed and zoning documents. They clearly state that my land isn't within your boundaries." Murmurs rippled through the room. An older man in the back stood up. "If his land's not in the homeowner association, we've got no business telling him what to do. Let's not waste time on this." Susan's face flushed. "Regardless of technicalities, his construction impacts our community. Without our approval, we can make it very difficult for him to proceed." Frustrated, I replied, "I'm not here to seek your approval. My permits are already in process. I just want to avoid further misunderstandings." The meeting ended in tense silence, but I left feeling uneasy. Over the next few weeks, Susan made good on her threat. My contractors received letters warning of legal consequences if they continued work. I found protest signs planted at my property's entrance accusing me of destroying the environment and lowering property values. The homeowner association even filed a baseless complaint with the town, delaying my permits. One morning, I arrived at the site to find Susan and 2 men in suits waiting. She handed me a cease-and-desist order. "This property is within our jurisdiction. Stop all construction immediately or face legal action." I skimmed the document. "This isn't enforceable," I said, tossing it back to her. "If you don't leave, I'll call the sheriff." Her expression darkened. "You're making a mistake. We have powerful allies in this town." "And I have the law on my side," I replied. "Now get off my land." As they drove off, I felt a mix of anger and determination. This wasn't just about building a house anymore. It was about standing up for my rights. What I didn't know was how far Susan and her homeowner association were willing to go to stop me. The following weeks became a whirlwind of escalating tension. Susan and the homeowner association doubled down on their efforts to disrupt my project. Despite having no legitimate claim to my property, they used every bureaucratic trick in the book to create roadblocks. My permits were suddenly flagged for additional review, inspections were mysteriously delayed, and contractors who had previously been eager to work on my project were now hesitant to even return my calls. I'd always considered myself a patient person, but their tactics were testing my limits. One afternoon, as I was reviewing materials with my project manager, a group of protesters gathered at the edge of my property, holding signs and chanting slogans about preserving the character of the community. Many of them didn't even seem to be from Pinewood Valley, and I had a sneaking suspicion Susan had organized the protest. When I tried to speak with them, they ignored me, their chants growing louder. The final straw came when a county inspector showed up unannounced. He informed me that my project had been flagged for a noise violation complaint, which would require yet another review. "It's unusual, I'll admit," he said, looking apologetic. "But with the homeowner association involved, things can get complicated." That night, as I sat on my porch, I realized I needed a new strategy. Fighting the homeowner association's petty tactics one by one wasn't going to work. I needed to go on the offensive. The next morning, I began gathering evidence. I documented every instance of interference, from the letters sent to my contractors to the baseless complaints filed with the town. I spoke to neighbors who had their own stories of homeowner association overreach, compiling testimonies of intimidation and bullying. The most damning piece of evidence came from one of Susan's former allies on the board, a man named Robert. He'd recently resigned, disillusioned by Susan's power grabs and underhanded tactics. "Susan's been pushing the boundaries for years," Robert confided. "She wants to expand Whispering Pines' control over as much of the valley as possible. Your property is just the latest target, but she's overstepped this time. If you're willing to stand up to her, I think you'll find a lot of people ready to back you." Armed with my evidence, I contacted a lawyer specializing in property disputes. She reviewed my case and assured me I had a strong legal position. "This cease-and-desist order they're waving around is laughable," she said with a smirk. "We'll file a countersuit for harassment and interference. Let's see how they like playing defense." With my lawyer's guidance, I submitted formal complaints against the homeowner association to both the county and state authorities. At the same time, I took my story to the local press. The Pinewood Gazette published a detailed article about my battle with the homeowner association, including interviews with other residents who'd been victimized by Susan's heavy-handed leadership. The article struck a nerve in the community, and public opinion began to shift. Letters to the editor poured in, criticizing the homeowner association and demanding accountability. The next homeowner association meeting was a turning point. I arrived early, armed with copies of my evidence and accompanied by several supportive neighbors. The atmosphere in the room was tense, with Susan seated at the head of the table, flanked by her usual supporters. But it was clear she was on edge. The recent backlash had shaken her confidence. When it was my turn to speak, I stood and addressed the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to set the record straight. The homeowner association has no legal authority over my property, yet Susan and her board have gone to great lengths to obstruct my project and harass me. I have documented every step of their campaign against me, and I'm prepared to take legal action if this doesn't stop immediately." A murmur ran through the room. Susan tried to interject, but I continued. "Furthermore, I have evidence of financial irregularities and abuse of power within the homeowner association. These issues don't just affect me, they affect every member of this community. It's time for transparency and accountability." I handed out copies of my evidence to the attending members, many of whom looked shocked as they flipped through the documents. Robert, who had joined me at the meeting, stood to speak. "I can confirm everything Sam has said. Susan's actions have crossed the line, and it's time for a change in leadership." The room erupted in debate. Some members defended Susan, but many expressed frustration and anger over her behavior. The meeting ended with a motion to hold a special election to replace the board, a motion that passed overwhelmingly. As I left the meeting, Susan's icy glare followed me, but I felt a sense of vindication. The tide was turning, and for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. The weeks leading up to the special election were nothing short of chaotic. Whispering Pines Estates was a community divided, with lines being drawn between those who supported Susan's leadership and those who had grown disillusioned with her tactics. Yard signs began popping up around the neighborhood, some proclaiming, "Support Susan," while others simply read, "It's time for change." The tension was palpable at every corner, from the local coffee shop to the community park. For my part, I focused on preparing for the legal battle that was still brewing. My lawyer filed the countersuit, alleging harassment, defamation, and interference with contractual relations. The homeowner association's legal team tried to stall proceedings, but the mounting evidence against them was undeniable. The local media continued to follow the story, with the Pinewood Gazette publishing updates that kept the pressure on Susan and her allies. Despite the turmoil, progress on my house continued. The contractors who had stuck with me worked diligently, and I made sure to be present at the site every day, both to oversee the work and to deter any further interference from the homeowner association. By mid-October, the structure was taking shape, and I could finally see my dream home coming to life. The sight of it gave me a renewed sense of purpose. Then one afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Emily Carter, a young woman who'd recently moved into Whispering Pines. She was holding a clipboard and looked slightly nervous as she approached. "Hi, Sam," she said, offering a tentative smile. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I've been going door to door collecting signatures for a petition. It's to establish new checks and balances within the homeowner association and ensure more transparency in its operations." I took the clipboard and skimmed through the petition. It called for term limits on board members, mandatory financial disclosures, and a more democratic process for approving major decisions. It was well written and clearly aimed at addressing the issues that had plagued the homeowner association under Susan's leadership. "This is a great idea," I said, signing my name. "How's the response been so far?" Emily shrugged. "It's mixed. A lot of people are on board, but some are afraid to go against Susan. She's got a way of making people feel intimidated." I nodded, understanding all too well. "Well, you've got my support. Let me know if there's anything else I can do to help." Over the next few days, I noticed more and more people rallying around Emily's petition. It was clear that the tide was turning, and Susan's grip on the community was slipping. The upcoming election began to feel less like a long shot and more like a real opportunity for change. When Election Day finally arrived, the atmosphere at the Whispering Pines clubhouse was electric. Residents packed the room, many of them holding copies of the petition or wearing buttons that read, "Transparency Matters." Susan and her remaining supporters sat on one side of the room, their expressions steely, while the rest of us filled the other side, buzzing with anticipation. The voting process was overseen by a neutral third party, ensuring there would be no accusations of tampering. As the ballots were cast, I couldn't help but feel a mix of nerves and excitement. This was the culmination of months of struggle, and while I knew the battle wasn't over, winning this election would be a significant step forward. When the results were finally announced, the room erupted. Susan had been decisively voted out, along with two of her staunchest allies. In their place, a new board was elected, made up of community members who had pledged to prioritize transparency, accountability, and inclusivity. Emily Carter, to my surprise and delight, was among them. Susan's reaction was as dramatic as I'd expected. She stood up, accused the community of falling for lies and smear tactics, and stormed out of the clubhouse. A few of her loyalists followed, but the majority of the room broke into applause as the new board took their places at the table. After the meeting, Emily approached me, her face glowing with excitement. "We did it," she said, beaming. "This is the start of something better for everyone." I couldn't help but smile back. "It's a big step, but there's still a lot of work to do. Let me know how I can help." That night, as I sat on the nearly completed porch of my house, I felt a sense of relief I hadn't experienced in months. The battle with the homeowner association wasn't entirely over. The countersuit was still pending, and there were lingering tensions within the community. But for the first time, it felt like we were moving in the right direction. As the stars lit up the Colorado sky, I allowed myself a moment to dream about the future. The house was more than just a structure. It was a symbol of resilience, a testament to standing up for what's right. And now, with a community rallying for change, I felt more hopeful than ever that we could build something truly lasting together. The weeks following the election brought a whirlwind of change to Whispering Pines Estates. With the new homeowner association board in place, the atmosphere in the community began to shift. Emily and the other members wasted no time implementing reforms. They introduced measures to ensure financial transparency, opened all board meetings to the public, and established a new dispute resolution process to prevent the kind of harassment I'd endured. While the community seemed to be on the mend, my own battle wasn't over yet. The countersuit against the homeowner association was making its way through the legal system. And though Susan was no longer in power, her influence still lingered. I'd occasionally hear whispers about her trying to rally support for a comeback, but most people had grown weary of her antics. One crisp November morning, as I was inspecting the final touches on my house, my lawyer called with good news. "The homeowner association has agreed to settle," she said. "They're dropping all claims and offering to cover a portion of your legal fees. It's not a full admission of guilt, but it's as close as we're going to get." Relief washed over me. The settlement was a clear victory, one that validated everything I'd fought for. Still, I knew this wasn't just about winning. It was about ensuring no one else in the community would have to face the same struggles. The day my house was finally completed felt like a triumph. Standing on the front porch, I took in the view of the snow-dusted pines and the glistening stream that ran along the edge of the property. This was what I dreamed of, a place that felt like home, built on my terms. But the real surprise came a few weeks later, during the first official meeting of the new homeowner association board. Emily invited me to attend, not as a participant, but as a guest speaker. The room was filled with residents, many of whom I recognized from the protests and meetings that had defined the past year. The atmosphere was one of optimism and collaboration. When it was my turn to speak, I stood at the front of the room and looked out at the crowd. "This past year has been one of the most challenging of my life," I began, "but it's also been one of the most rewarding. I've learned that standing up for what you believe in isn't easy, but it's always worth it. And I've seen firsthand the power of a community coming together to create positive change." I paused, letting the words sink in. "The reforms this new board is implementing will make Whispering Pines a better place for everyone. But this is just the beginning. Real change takes time, effort, and a commitment from all of us to do what's right." The room erupted in applause, and as I stepped down, Emily gave me a thumbs up from her seat. It felt like the closing of one chapter and the start of another. In the months that followed, the community continued to thrive. The new homeowner association board worked tirelessly to rebuild trust, and the changes they enacted made a tangible difference. Susan's name faded from conversation, replaced by talk of new projects and shared goals. My home became something of a symbol for resilience, and I often found myself fielding questions from neighbors about sustainable building practices. One spring afternoon, as I was planting wildflowers along the edge of my property, I heard a familiar voice. Turning, I saw Emily walking up the driveway, a folder tucked under her arm. "Hey, Sam," she said, smiling. "Got a minute?" "Sure, what's up?" She handed me the folder. "We've been working on a proposal to create a community greenbelt. It would connect the neighborhood to your property and the surrounding trails. The board thinks it could be a great way to bring people together and promote outdoor activities. But we wanted to get your input before moving forward." Flipping through the plans, I felt a surge of pride. The idea was exactly the kind of initiative the community needed, a far cry from the divisiveness of the past. "This is a fantastic idea," I said. "Count me in. Whatever you need, I'm happy to help." The Greenbelt project became a labor of love for the entire community. Families volunteered to clear trails, plant native trees, and build picnic areas. By the time it was completed, Whispering Pines had transformed into a place where neighbors weren't just coexisting, but truly connecting. On the day of the Greenbelt's grand opening, I stood on the same porch where I'd once stared down Susan and her allies. Looking out at the crowd gathered below, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The battles had been hard fought, but they'd paved the way for something truly special. As the sun set over the valley, Emily joined me on the porch, holding 2 glasses of iced tea. "Not a bad view," she said, handing me a glass. I raised my glass in a toast. To change, to resilience, and to a community that finally found its way. She clinked her glass against mine. And to neighbors who refused to back down. We stood there in comfortable silence, watching as the lights of Whispering Pines began to twinkle in the twilight. The fight might have started with a single house, But it had ended with something much greater, a stronger, more united community that had learned the value of standing together. Are you hungry for more slices of stories? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell to never miss out on any videos. See you tomorrow.